If you ever find yourself standing under a sour, orange moon and the world feels like it's holding its breath, don't go to the barn. That's the sentence I wish I could push into your hands before anything else. It would be kinder than what I'm about to tell you. I came back for the roof. That's what I told myself while driving the country road, watching the moon hang like a coin over the fields. The farmhouse was just a map memory. The barn was the thing that had kept my nightmares honest. Up close, it looked smaller than in my head, all wood and joints and the tired geometry of a thing that had been meant to shelter animals, not secrets. A red halo from the moon wrapped the whole place in wrong light. Everything ordinary turned theatrical and aggressive. The grass at the edge of the yard hissed under my boots. Each blade glittered like a dark tooth. There was no wind, but the barn breathed. I can't describe that sound properly. It wasn't a creak or a groan you could blame on old nails. It was a deep swallowing, like something settling into a throat. The big doors hung half open, despite the latches being intact. I remember thinking then that whatever had opened them didn't need to force anything. It had simply been invited by a silence I hadn't noticed until then. Inside smelled like wet hay and something metallic, the way a coin tastes on the tongue. The smell hit me before my eyes adjusted, copper and rot, and the faint, obscene sweetness of something decayed for too long. The light from my phone was a cowardly thing. It made shadows in the shape of hands. I stepped in, and the floor sucked a small, familiar tune from my feet. The same pattern of boards I had walked as a child. The same hollow under the loft where mice like to keep their winter work. At first, it was ordinary. A rusted tractor, a stack of hay bales, a rope thrown over a beam that hung like an unfinished sentence. Then, I found the tracks. Wet prints in the dust that led from the center of the stall toward the back, as if someone, or something, had walked out and left the mud of the field drying on the boards. The prints were too long, though. Each impression stretched farther than a foot should. Between the tread marks, there was a thin smear, like a finger dragged across an old photograph. I told myself it was an animal. I told myself the moon was playing tricks. Still, my skin tightened the way wire does before the storm. I climbed the ladder to the loft because curiosity is its own kind of cowardice. Halfway up, I heard the first knock. One soft, deliberate oak knuckle against the barn wall, coming from somewhere deeper than the tool shed. A sound that answered me by name, though I'd never spoken it aloud. The knock came again, 3 slow, careful taps that sounded like someone testing a name. I froze on the ladder. The sound didn't echo so much as fold in on itself, like a book closing around a secret. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it, that adrenaline had varnished the wood into music. Then the loft answered with a sigh, a rush of air that smelled of mold and old pennies, and a whisper threaded through it that was unmistakably my voice. At first, I blamed acoustics. Barns are full of tricks, angles that double whispers, rafters that carry distant noises. But the voice kept saying things I hadn't told anyone. Not about the scar under my left elbow, not about the name I had carved into a beam when I was 10 and thought I would live forever. It repeated a memory of a summer so precisely I could taste the lemonade on my tongue. The breath against my ear felt real, and I had the exact, irrational certainty that someone had slid a fingertip over the place where my childhood initials were still burned into the wood. I climbed to the loft because I wanted distance from the floor where the prints had started. Up there, the hay shifted like a pulse. In the dim light, the shadow of the barn's rafters became a cage around the moon. Something moved in the stall below, and the light of my phone scattered like frightened insects. When I peered over the loft railing, the tractor was gone. Not moved, but gone, an absence so clean it looked carved. Dust hung in the air in a slow, deliberate cloud, and where the tractor had stood, the floorboards were blackened in concentric rings, as if something heavy had burned a mark into the grain. The prints reappeared at my feet, not in the dust, but in me, like an impression on skin. I could trace them with my toes, too wide, too long, angled wrong. And then I realized the smear between each print wasn't mud, it was dried blood, flaking like old varnish. My phone light trembled, and for a second the beam revealed photographs propped against a bale of hay. Polaroids, edges chewed by rodents, each one a frame of my life. Me as a child in this barn, me as a teenager in this same doorway. But the faces in the pictures were changed in small, impossible ways. My mouth at 7 was too wide. My eyes at 16 were darker, as if someone had painted the irises with ink. Panic became a tactile thing. My hands shook until the ladder swayed. Downstairs, something banged against the outer wall, steady and urgent, the kind of sound a living thing makes when it remembers an old hunger. The barn didn't want visitors. It wanted stories. It wanted names to stitch into its boards. I understood then that the prints were not tracks of leaving, but of return. Someone, or something, had been walking out of time and back into this place, and each step had lengthened, stretched by whatever hunger lived in the grain. I screamed once, a raw sound that the loft swallowed whole. The answer was immediate. The doors at the front of the barn slammed shut with a violence that rattled the windows, and the moonlight outside blinked like an eye closing. Then a new noise started from below. Not knocking this time, but a soft, wet scraping, as if something were pulling itself along the floor toward the ladder. It moved with purpose. It knew where I was. I didn't think. I climbed down as if pulled by a string, fingers numb on the rungs, my boots whispering against the wood. The scraping grew louder, closer, and for a second, I could have sworn it breathed. Up close, it was not the crawl of an animal, but the dragging of skin over splintered timber. The smell changed, copper sharpened by something sweeter, like old fruit left too long in the sun. Each step I took answered with a soft, hungry hiss from the floorboards. When I reached the stall, the air was thick with the taste of metal. The photographs littered the hay now, blown as if by some internal breath. Faces turned toward me, eyes empty and waiting. In the center of the room, a shape lay coiled like a sack of shadows. It was small at first, then uncoiled to a length that bent the light wrong. It had the prints, those same 2 long depressions, embedded in its skin where mud had dried into pattern. As it turned, I saw the thing had my grandfather's work jacket draped over it like a shroud. The jacket had the smell of his pipe and the cigarette burn on the cuff I knew by touch. I told myself to run. I stepped backward, and my heel caught on a nail. Pain flared white-hot, and the barn laughed in response, not with sound, but with a shifting of boards, like a smile closing. The thing moved with a slow, intimate curiosity. It didn't lunge, it cataloged me, the way a farmer marks livestock. Its head tilted, as if trying to remember what name fit the face it studied. It reached with a limb that ended in too many joints and laid it on the beam where my initials were carved all those years ago. The wood sank around the touch, as if the initials were a latch. I felt it then, a pressure under my skin, an announcement that something was reading me. Memories surfaced unbidden and wrong. My mother's voice saying things I never heard her say, holidays that didn't happen, a childhood room with a door I had never opened. The photographs by the hay drifted into my hands, and the faces rearranged themselves. Each picture showed me smaller and less present, until one frame held only the outline of my shadow, an absence waiting to be filled. I wanted to scream, but the barn took my voice and folded it into the rafters. The thing leaned close enough that I could see my reflection in the wet sheen of its eye. A reflection with no mouth, with an edge where a jaw should be. It pressed something cold and flat into my palm. I didn't feel my fingers close around it. I watched as my hand opened to accept what it offered, a single Polaroid. I saw myself in it, standing in this exact barn, older and pale, the light in the photo already fading as if erased by time. Hands, my hands, pulled me toward the loft. Not the thing's hands, but mine, acting like someone else's. I tried to hold on to the ladder, to the grain in the wood, to the scar under my elbow. One by one, the photographs fluttered up like birds and slipped into the mouth of the barn, which opened wider than wood should allow. I felt myself tilting, unstitched from the moment I had occupied. The last thing I heard was the moon outside, a steady, patient coin being counted. They will not find the body, because the barn does not keep bodies. It keeps stories. Remember to never go to the barn.
「 Aloud. 'Aloud. 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 'Alo for a story bar.